So, a very warm welcome then to all of you to Gofal in Gwinllan, and it's all about the contribution of the Church in Wales to the Welsh language, its literature and culture. And we'll start by introducing you to our first speaker, Dr. Rhidian Griffiths. He's been a member of the National Library of Wales staff and is interested in different aspects of history and music in Wales, and also, of course, in choral singing, and is the president of the Hymns Association of Wales. And the title of the conversation this evening are Three Erudite Priests, and their names are John Jones, IoanTegid, Daniel Evans, Daniel V from Siân, and John Blackwell. Well, thank you very much. Well, a very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to take part once again in this series of Gofal in Gwynllan, and I apologise if my voice is a little bit hoarse. I'll try and be understandable. But the three priests who we pay attention to this evening are part of the network of the erudite priests, these Anglican priests that took a great interest in the literature and traditions of Wales in the first half of the 19th century and made every effort to protect the Welsh character of the church. Now, these three today were not the most prominent in that network, but they were very interesting characters and peers and friends, and we'll take them in the order of their birth. John Jones, IoanTegid, Daniel Evans, or Daniel V, or Black Daniel from Cymreigyddion, and John Blackwell, Alun. Now, as his poetic name suggests, John Jones came from Bala, or IoanTegid, and he was born to Henry and Catherine Jones on the 10th of February 1792, and schooled in Bala and then in Carmarthen. In 1814, he went to Jesus College, Oxford, where he graduated in mathematics. Now, having taken his orders in 1819, his episcopal orders, he was invited by Bishop Heber to go and teach in a new college in Calcutta, but he chose to stay in Oxford, where he was appointed as a leader of a song in Christ Church College, which was the cathedral of the Oxford Episcopacy. And as a cantor, he was given care of the parish of St. Thomas the Martyr in Oxford, in Osney, by the river, and not far away from the train station today. And there, he made a lot of different amendments and improvements, including opening the school to the poor of the parish, both girls and boys, to play to him. And he also strengthened the congregation and developed the church building. And at the end of his period in Oxford, he actually purchased a resident boat for holding services for those working on the river and the nearby canal. This is a man of great ability and imagination. Now, IoanTegid, or Tegid, as he called himself often, was a bit of a scholar as well. He translated the text of the book of Isaiah from Hebrew to English, a standard translation that attracted a lot of praise, and also translated to Welsh. But the Welsh version was never published. In Oxford as well, he copied the text of the Mabinogion in the Red Book of Hurgest on behalf of Lady Charlotte Guest. And in her impression of the Mabinogion, she acknowledges his help. And then with Gwaster Mechain, he prepared a publication of the works of Lewis Glyn Cothi. And he also devised an essay on the Welsh language and prepared a publication of the New Testament on behalf of the SPCK in 1828. But the weakness of that particular publication, and Tegid's weakness, was that he embraced the ideas of William Owen Pugh, something that attracted quite a lot of opposition and a lot of petitioning within the church for that orthography. Now, even though he was very, very successful in Oxford, he nevertheless maintained that desire to return to Wales, and in 1841, through the influence of Lady Llanover, he was appointed to the parish of Nanhyfer in Pembrokeshire, and he went about his tasks and his work there assiduously and became very popular and endeared himself very much to the parish. One tribute to him, 1902, describes him as a short man, a concise man, and a man who was had no ego attached to him, and he was a man of great humour as well, very good at throwing his voice, and enjoyed causing all sorts of confusion in company by being able to throw his voice. And there's one description of him going on a journey with a friend and arriving late to the funeral he was supposed to officiate in, and indeed the funeral had actually come to an end by the time he got there, and that's because he was talking to so many people on the way, and so many people wanted to talk to him. And in Nanhyfer as well, he took a great interest in antiquities, the area, and kept studying and writing poetry and supporting the Fenni Eisteddfod, the Abergavenny Eisteddfod of the time, and he was one of the supporters of the Welsh Manuscript Society that was formed in 1836. And that was to protect Welsh historical manuscripts. And for his poetic produce, we must turn then to a volume of poems that was published by his nephew in 1859, 7 years after Tegid had died. And some of these poems are still to be seen on things like ballads, for example, this one, which is the visit of the poet to his own home, and the dream of the bard. And this suggests the fact that these were on popular sheets that may have been sold at fairs and sung there as well. They were very sentimental songs, and they were very popular as well. And you'll see that this was translated by Charlotte Guest and appears on at least one version, both with Welsh and English side by side. And Tegid as well could sing with humour. And in one of his poems, The Poet of Nanhyfer, he describes a journey that he made with his company, Bunyan, through the great snow, over the hill and back to Nanhyfer. Bunyan was the name of his pony, of course, and it took them several days to get to Cilgerran and back because the rain had turned into snow and drifts. And in the method of the older carol singers, Tegid tells us when this was. It was, of course, 1847. And it's the beginning and the end of the poem that we see there. It's a very long one, but it is, nevertheless, a poem that you could sing to the tune of Mochyn D, Black Pig. And that is what I did as I read it. I would sing it in my head to that tune. So there's more life and naturalism in these poems than in his more serious poems, because these were light poems to be used across the country. But amongst the more serious tones as well, we will hear things, great things, including the wonderful poem that was a tribute to Thomas Charles, who was also from Bala. And he would have loved to have had a parish in Montgomeryshire, having written this great elegy to Thomas Charles. But it was, the problem was that he would not have had any better income than Nanhyfer, which was a comparatively poor parish. So the only promotion he ever got was actually for prebender in St. David's Cathedral, which gave him no extra income. And sadly, he died at the age of 60 in 1852, and that's a picture of his gravestone there. But there is now a monument to him as well. That's the original tombstone. And in the magazine Yr Haul, or Sun, The Sun, in 1855, 3 years later, there was a series of memories written of him, which includes a very sad description of the way that his library was destroyed and his papers were just auctioned off in the Nanhaver vicarage. And I mentioned earlier about the offer he received to go to Calcutta. Now, whatever his real reason was for refusing the offer, one public influence on him and on his decision was a poem written by his very close friend, Daniel V. from Cymreigyddion. Now, this is another poem and type of poem that would appear often on these sheets. And they both were peers in Jesus College, Oxford, and they developed very, very close friendship. And in the summer of 1819, when Tegid was considering this offer, this invitation to go to India, Daniel composed a series of poems under the title Country of My Birth, Gwlad fy Nghenedigaeth. And it says, when IoanTegid, the brother of the author, intended to leave the country of his birth and settle in East India. So the aim was to attract that poet not to leave the country of his birth by picturing this complaint in the following way. And it says then, my heart is heavy, my spirit is heavy, and so on. It goes on like this for 26 verses, each one of them closing with the line, Gwlad fy Nghenedigaeth, the country of my birth, and finishes that by rhyming. And so in the method and style of the people who wrote Cywydd earlier, he did the same style there. And of course, Thomas responded to him with every poem closing on Gwlad fy Nghenedigaeth, my birth. It was a lovely exchange there. And he says there, I will never see vast India from the country of my birth. And they're written in the Gwenynen Gwent harp verses. This is the style that both poems rather liked. And there is something in this picture we see on screen now that reminds you of Sir Percy Blakeney, something of the Regency buck perhaps. But the picture actually belongs to the time when he was in Jesus College, Oxford. But of course, Daniel was actually from Cymreigyddion, and he was born on the 5th of March 1792, a few weeks after IoanTegid, on the Maes Mynach farm in the parish of Llanfihangel Ystrad, which is between Aberaeron and Lampeter. And he was educated in schools in Lampeter before going to Jesus College, Oxford, where he graduated as a BA in 1814 and where he got to know Tegid. And in 1817, he received his MA and was elected as a fellow of the college, and then become a chaplain to the Royal Military Asylum, of all places, in Northampton. But because of the condition of his health, he returned to the area of his birth to live. And he never held a post, an ecclesiastical post from that moment on, even though he kept his fellowship in Jesus College, Oxford, and returned there once a year to ensure that he could keep it. You can do it in those days, just appear once a year to ensure that you had your fellowship. And he lived in his old home in Maes Mynach and in Maes Newydd, which is a very nearby house, for the rest of his life. And it was there that he enjoyed the life of his country. He enjoyed fishing and hunting with the local squire. But also, he was very keen and passionate about his Welshness. He had, for example, a hunting watch with the words on it, "Ei hiaith ag adrant," their language they will keep, engraved upon it. And he was also very ready to give service in the churches of the area when demanded. And this is the words of the biography that was prepared for him by his niece Elizabeth Morgan, that he preached many times in Pencarreg Church. He helped in funerals and also in marriages, weddings and baptisms, as is seen from the list and registers of the churches of Llanfihangel Ystrad and Ddu. So he was obviously very good at on the groundwork as a priest, and he took interest as well in the poetry, and very early on in his life, and won the Eisteddfod in the 1820s, regional Eisteddfods in Dyfed in 1823, and he won the chair for the Awdl on the establishment of St David's College in Lampeter. The Awdl now has been forgotten and is quite forgettable anyway, but it's of interest to me because now that we celebrate the bicentenary of the establishment of Lampeter, it's interesting to note that it was significant enough to be the subject of a competition at the Eisteddfod at the time. Have a look at the words in a summary. The youth of Wales, no need to seek education from foreign countries, no need to have the necessity. And that was the whole point of establishing Lampeter, of those who had the Welsh intentions of those who established it, realising those. And so perhaps it's in his free verse that we see the true character of him coming to light. On St David's Day in 1827, when Lampeter was opening its doors for the first time, he greeted very likely, more likely than in his Awdl, and as Gwynllan noticed, it was some echo of Edward Richard in his work. So he says to the college, my muse, the subject you treated, and he finishes on the second verse by saying, whilst the river Tavy flows freely and the birds abound, and sing, never, never, your majesty, fully, that St David's will flower in talent. So that was the me saying happy bicentenary, but the collection of his poems, Gwynllan was actually published in 1831 and reprinted in 1872 and again in 1906, which does suggest that the interest in this man and his work did continue. And a lot of the content of the 1906 publication are friends to people that he knew, written as strict verse englyn, both to greet people as hymns, and also in the same way, many of his poems were actually safeguarded on ballot forms and protected for the future. And they do suggest that they were very popular as well. But we do also see on screen now this inscription on a tombstone from 1906, Gwynllan, that was appropriated and also claims to have been written by Daniel Ddu. Daniel Ddu suffered from depression throughout his life, and when you scrutinize these words, it's terribly sad to note that he took his own life on the 28th of March, 1846, at the age of 54. And we return to Pembrokeshire for the third poet priest, which was John Blackwell, or Alun, his nickname, or nom de plume was. Pembrokeshire is his resting place, but he wasn't born there. He was actually born in Ponterwyl, near Mold, and his poetic name takes the name of the Alun River near Mold. And of these three, this trio, he's the best poet and perhaps the most well-known character too. He's the son of Peter and Mary Blackwell, and his ancestors from his father's side came to Wales from Derby, and that was Blackwell, and took root in Wales. Alun had next to no formal education, but at the age of 11, he became an apprentice cobbler with a man called William Kirkham, who took great interest in poetry. And Alun was therefore educated in his workplace. He was a great reader and swallowed every book that he could grasp. He mastered King Hanedd and started competing in the local Eisteddfods and came to prominence at the same time as Ddu and IoanTegid. And in 1823, in the Wyddgrug Eisteddfod, he started winning winning the awdl to Maes Garmon and Rhuthun, where he won the awdl for the birth of course, the Edward I's son, the prince that was introduced to Wales in Caernarfon. Very timely indeed, very topical. But also, his letters to the ecclesiastical publication, the Gwyliadydd, also drew attention. And in light of it, he arranged, a lot of priests arranged for him, and a lot of wealthy people in the area raised a lot of money for him in order to provide education for him. And the result of this was that he went to Thomas Richards, Aberyw, who was the son of Thomas Richards from Ddu and Alun, who held some sort of grammar school, really, and prepared him to go to university. And then finally, in 1824, he did indeed go to Jesus College, Oxford, and graduated there 4 years later, before being appointed as a curate in St. Martin's Church in Holywell. And then in 1828, he was made a rector of Maynard Davy in northern Pembrokeshire, where Ifor Cerry would be the rector, had been the rector 20 years before. And that's where Alun spent the rest of his career. Now, like Tegid, he had a lot of success in his parish. Indeed, the Maynard Davy church was resurrected and improved and refurbished, and he also held Welsh services regularly as well as English ones for the aristocracy area. And the rector had the pleasure of seeing that little, isolated, obscure church full to the brim on several occasions. A new bridge was built in order to make the way to the church easier, but a coracle was kept in the corridor just in case that people need to escape from the floods. The church is no longer used as a church anymore, but it is given great care by the society that looks after moribund churches now, and I understand that the coracle still is in the corridor there. Now, though Alun did not write much poetry, having gone to Maynard Davy, he nevertheless kept to his written work, and in 1834-35 he edited the magazine following a request from the Society for the Spreading of Beneficial Information, an English association that wanted to extend its influence in Wales. And the tone of the preface of the magazine frightens one. Men often waste their time because they don't fully well know how to use it better. It would be far better for the world if men knew better how to spend their leisure time. And this was an attempt, I suppose, to fill people's leisure time. This magazine, which is noted in its time for the variety of content and the quality of its artistic work as well, as you see on screen. But unfortunately, the magazine got no support widely and came to an end after 18 issues. And that's partially because there was no denominational audience that would have been ready for it, as there were in many Welsh magazines of the time. And unfortunately, the appeal was too general and perhaps didn't hook a ready audience. But also by the 1830s, Alun's health was declining. He married in 1839 a woman from Holywell called Matilda Ddu, but they only enjoyed a few months of marital life before his death on the 19th of May, 1840, at the age of 42. Alun, like Daniel Ddu and IoanTegid, were very committed Welsh clerics who believed in making the church more Welsh, and their literary interests were proof of that. Just like Tegid and Daniel Ddu, he knew Ifor Cerry and had experienced his hospitality. And in Oxford, he would remember the great company, among whom the long winter evening would be charmed away in national melodies and the tales of other days, as he said. And as a poet, he was quite well ahead of the other two. And in The History of Welsh Literature by Thomas Parry, Alun attracts that appreciative attention. They say the first thing in his poems are the wonderful simplicity of his rich language and his style, and that in the middle of the inflammatory outline, those outlaws that Alun composed, of course. And his poetry is of high quality, and one of his poems in particular, Cafl i'r Eos, which is a poem written to the Nightingale, and he then made these poems to go with very famous tunes like Rhidian Griffiths and Auld Lang Syne, and the poems are particularly good that he's written, and they're just as good, if not better, than Robbie Burns's verses. And Alun's poems were given their prominent place, just like the other two, on ballot sheets, especially the Song for the Wife of the Fisherman, Carn Graig y Pysgotwr. But perhaps the greatest tribute to Alun as a poet is that two of his poems, Dolly, well, Sochi, Dolly, did you know Dolly and Rhywun, which means someone? These poems were learnt off by heart by the folk of the day, and they've been collected as folk songs 2 generations after Alun had died. And we see here how the words of Rhywun remain firmly now in the tradition of the harp verses and could be easily labelled as traditional verses. And to summarise, perhaps these 3 are not in the Premier League of Welsh famous people, nor in the front row of those erudite personages, but I do believe it's worth drawing attention to what's common to them all. Firstly, they were educated in Jesus College, Oxford. In the period before establishing higher education in Wales, Jesus College, Oxford played a great part in contributing towards the education of people from Wales, and in particular, education for clerics. But these 3 also were witness to a very significant movement indeed to the nation, and that was the establishment of the college at Trinity College, Lampeter, in 1822. This was an ecclesiastical haven and scholarly place which provided all the needs, the Welsh needs of the Anglican Church, in a way that Jesus College could not. And that's why Rhys Rhys was appointed, the nephew of W.J. Rhys, as one of the professors of Welsh when the college was established. This also was the first university in Wales. That was the first step towards the establishment of the University of Wales 50 years later. And that movement, of course, in its turn, gradually changed the relationship of Jesus College with the old country. The 3 also were part of the Eisteddfod movement of the 1820s, and the Fenni Eisteddfods after that. And whatever our opinion is about the bloated language of the illegible awdls of the period, we cannot deny the importance of the Eisteddfod movement that bore the fruit of the Eisteddfod that is now. It was an establishment that was just as important as the university in its own way in the 19th century and beyond. And the 3 also were part of a wider network of those erudite parsons. And in our age, at least in our own opinion, is networking. And I've been struck many times by looking at that same period, how powerful, how important, how influential these networks of people were. People of birds of a feather, if you like-minded souls. They were so important and influential by protecting tradition and creating change in society. And so thanks to the recent efforts of Dr. Mary Ellis, and thanks to her, we know far more about these erudite personages than we did before. But I wonder whether we fully appreciated the vastness of their contribution together. We tend to look at Thomas Richards, Maya Richards, Ifor Kerry, Gwynllan Mechain, and several others individually. But here we see a special network of people, both famous and less famous, who supported each other, who fed each other with information and influenced each other. And I assume that Ifor Kerry plays a central part in the network, like a spider in the middle of a web, if you forgive the simile. Alun and Tegid talked about the beauty and the wonderful company that Ifor Kerry gave and the sharing of the traditional airs and verses and stories on that cultured hearth. And IoanTegid and Alun formed stories out of it, and they wrote verses in memory of Ifor Kerry, all three of them, and they did them on the traditional measures, the traditional forms that found their way onto the ballot sheets, and some of them quite naturally, their style and their language, to become part of the folklore and folk memory of the country. So the shadow of the Treachery of the Blue books and our concept of the life and work of the Anglican Church in Wales in the 19th century, if anything, we should turn our attitude as well to other aspects and celebrate the fact that within that church, there were a number of committed priests, deeply respected and respectful and passionate towards the Welsh language and happy to use and promote it. Thank you for listening. Well, thank you. Very interesting. We have a chance to ask Rhidian a couple of questions. We've got 3 or 4 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Right, none have come through. Oh, there is one that's come through the chat. Ainsley. Let's have a look. The 3 erudite priests lived and worked in an age when the church's monopoly was very quickly disappearing and more Welsh people turning to the non-conformists. So what was the place of these 3 in the wider context of Christian witness and the efforts of others to treasure and develop the language? A very vast and wide question. As far as I can see, what I've read of the 3 is that they were on very good terms with their non-conformist peers. And I don't believe that there's any evidence of any competition, as it were, between them. I do believe that to a vast degree, people who appreciated literary things also appreciated literary things because they were in Welsh and literary, and not because they belonged to the church or the nonconformists. So, for example, Alun was editing a magazine that was aimed at a general audience. It wasn't his fault that denominational publications would take the audience away. And I think that the 3, just like the other erudite priests, even though they enjoyed the importance of the church and saw it as central, they nevertheless still placed an importance on Welshness, and that did not exclude the nonconformists in that time. I haven't seen any signs of that, and I've seen no signs of competition or jealousy. I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah, no, great, fantastic. I'm pleased to hear that there was no competition, that they, in terms of those principles, they were united. Thank you, that's lovely to hear. Thank you, Ainsley, and thanks for the explanation. Is there any other question?